They thought it was going to be the easiest bust of their careers. Two officers in a corrupt precinct saw a black man in a luxury car and saw nothing but a target. They laughed while they cuffed him. They mocked his suit. They ignored his calm warnings. But they forgot one crucial rule of the street: never judge a predator by its silence. Because the man they were booking on false charges wasn't just a tourist. He was Director Caleb Voss, the director of the FBI. And by the time they realized who was sitting in that holding cell, it was already too late. The rain didn't just fall on the winding asphalt of Interstate 95. It battered it, turning the Georgia highway into a slick, reflective ribbon of oil and water. Director Caleb Voss adjusted his grip on the leather steering wheel of his 1967 Shelby GT500. He wasn't in the armored Suburban that usually ferried him from the J. Edgar Hoover building to the White House. He wasn't wearing the earpiece that connected him to 1,000 agents. Tonight he was just Caleb, a 55-year-old man driving home from his father's funeral in Savannah, trying to outrun grief on a lonely stretch of road. He checked his speedometer, 54 in a 55 zone. He was meticulous. He had to be. A black man driving a classic muscle car worth more than a house in this part of the county didn't have the luxury of speeding. Then the lights cut through the darkness, blue and red, flashing with aggressive urgency in his rearview mirror. Caleb sighed, the sound heavy in the quiet cabin. He signaled, slowed down gradually, and pulled onto the muddy shoulder, keeping his hands visible at the 10 and 2 positions. He rolled the window down as the cruiser pulled up behind him, its spotlight blindingly bright, reflecting off his side mirror and stinging his eyes. He waited. Procedure dictated the officer approach, but they let him sit there for an uncomfortably long time. A power play. Finally, a shadow loomed at the window. Officer Dax Harlon didn't look like a public servant. He looked like a bouncer who enjoyed his job a little too much. Thick neck, buzz cut, and a uniform that strained against a torso built on bench presses and creatine. Behind him, a younger, skinnier officer, Officer Jax Miller, hovered near the taillight, his hand resting nervously on his holster. "License and registration," Harlon barked, not bothering with a greeting. Rain dripped from the brim of his hat onto Caleb's door panel. "Good evening, officer," Caleb said, his voice a low, cultivated baritone. "My wallet is in my breast pocket. I am going to reach for it now." "I didn't ask for a narration. I asked for the ID." Caleb moved slowly. He handed over the license. Harlon snatched it, shining his flashlight not on the card, but into Caleb's face. "Long way from home, aren't you, boy?" Harlon muttered, squinting at Caleb. It was a word designed to get a reaction, and Caleb Voss did not react. He calculated. "I was attending a funeral, officer. I'm heading back north." "In this car?" Harlon shined the light around the vintage leather interior. "This is a $60,000 vehicle. You a rapper, drug dealer, or did you just borrow it?" "It is registered in my name," Caleb said calmly. "If you run the plates, you'll see that." Harlon chuckled, a wet, ugly sound. "Oh, we'll run the plates, but I smell something." He leaned in, his face inches from Caleb's. "Miller, you smell that? Alcohol, and maybe a little weed. Step out of the car." Caleb tightened his jaw. He hadn't had a drink in 20 years. "Officer, I am the director of the—" "I said step out of the car!" Harlon shouted, his hand dropping to his taser. "Now, or I drag you out!" Caleb assessed the tactical situation. He was unarmed. He was alone. Physical resistance would result in a shooting, and the body cam footage would mysteriously malfunction. The smartest play was compliance. He unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the door. The moment his Italian leather shoe touched the mud, Harlon grabbed him. He spun Caleb around, slamming him face first into the cold metal of the Shelby's roof. "Stop resisting!" Harlon screamed for the benefit of the dash cam. "I am not resisting," Caleb said, his cheek pressed against the wet metal. "I am informing you that this is a mistake. Check my credentials in the wallet." "I don't care who you think you are," Harlon hissed, wrenching Caleb's arms behind his back with painful force. The handcuffs clicked tight, too tight. "You're in Oak Haven County now. My county." He shoved Caleb toward the cruiser. Miller grabbed the wallet from the car seat and tossed it onto the dashboard of the squad car without looking at it. "We're impounding the car," Harlon said, grinning as he shoved Caleb into the cramped, vomit-smelling back seat of the cruiser. "Civil asset forfeiture. Looks like the sheriff's department just got a new drag racer." Caleb sat in the darkness, the hard plastic seat digging into his back. He watched through the wire mesh as Harlon high-fived Miller. They were laughing. They were actually laughing. Caleb closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. He memorized the badge number pinned to Harlon's chest, 492. "Enjoy the laugh, 492, Caleb thought. "It will be your last." The Oak Haven police station was a relic of the mid-century, a brick block of humidity and fluorescent lights that buzzed like dying flies. It smelled of stale coffee, floor wax, and despair. Harlon paraded Caleb through the bullpen like a trophy buck. He shoved him toward the booking desk, where a bored sergeant named Vance Bullock was eating a glazed donut. "What do we have here?" Bullock asked, wiping sugar off his mustache. "DUI, resisting, assault on an officer." Harlon recited the litany of lies with practiced ease. "And he was driving a stolen Shelby." "It is not stolen," Caleb said. His suit was muddy, his hair wet, but he stood with a posture that made the room feel smaller. "And I demand my one phone call immediately." Harlon laughed, slapping the counter. "You hear that, Sarge? He demands it. You think this is law and order? You get a phone call when we're done processing you, and right now the system is down. Ain't that right, Miller?" Miller, standing by the water cooler, looked at his feet. Yeah. System's slow tonight." "Empty your pockets," Bullock commanded. Caleb couldn't. His hands were still cuffed. Harlon jerked him forward and began rifling through his pockets. He pulled out a sleek government-issue encrypted smartphone. "Fancy phone," Harlon sneered. "Burner?" "That is federal property," Caleb said. "If you attempt to unlock it, you will trigger a lockout protocol that will alert the nearest field office." Harlon stared at him, then burst out laughing. The sound echoed off the cinder block walls. "Federal property? Who are you? James Bond? You're a drunk driver in a stolen car, pal." He tossed the phone into a plastic bin with a clatter. Next came the wallet. Harlon flipped it open. He bypassed the badge section, going straight for the cash. He pulled out $300. "Look at this, Miller. Drug money." "Look behind the flap," Caleb said quietly. Harlon frowned. He flipped the leather flap of the wallet. Behind the driver's license was a gold shield. Not a local tin star, a heavy, intricate gold shield with the eagle at the top. Below it, a laminated ID card. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Director. The room went quiet for a heartbeat. Harlon squinted at it. Then he snorted. "You gotta be kidding me. A fake badge. You really went all out." "It's not a fake," Caleb said. "I am Director Caleb Voss. You need to call the Atlanta field office. Ask for Special Agent in Charge Marcus Ross. Tell him you have me in custody." Harlon looked at Bullock. Bullock looked at the badge, then back at Caleb. For a second, doubt crept into the sergeant's eyes, but the cognitive dissonance was too strong. In their world, a black man in a muddy suit on a Friday night wasn't the head of the FBI. He was just a perp with a good prop. I've seen better fakes at the flea market, Bullock decided, tossing the wallet into the bin. Add impersonating a federal officer to the charge sheet. That's a felony. Caleb stared at Bullock. He didn't blink. You are making a catastrophic error, Sergeant. Print him, Bullock ordered. They dragged him to the fingerprint scanner. Harlon forced Caleb's thumbs onto the glass, pressing down hard enough to bruise. Name? Bullock asked, typing on the ancient computer. Caleb Voss. The computer whirred. A loading bar crawled across the screen. System's going to flag him as a John Doe or show his rap sheet from whatever hood he crawled out of, Harlon bragged. The computer beeped. A red box popped up on the screen. Access denied. Classified record. Level 5 security clearance required. Bullock frowned, tapping the enter key. What the hell? It says access denied. Piece of junk, computer, Harlon said. It's glitching again. It's not a glitch, Caleb said. His voice dropped an octave, cutting through the hum of the room. It is a firewall. My biometrics are flagged in the NCIC database to prevent local law enforcement from accessing my file without authorization, because my file contains national security intelligence. Harlon grabbed Caleb by the collar, slamming him against the cinder block wall. Listen to me, you lying piece of trash. You think you can scare us with some tech talk? You're going into the hole, and you're staying there until morning. Let's see how level 5 you feel after days without basic comforts. Caleb looked into Harlon's eyes. He saw the pupil dilation, the sweat on the upper lip. This man was a bully, and bullies were terrified of things they didn't understand. Officer Harlon, Caleb whispered, there is a GPS tracker in the heel of my right shoe. It sends a ping every 15 minutes. If I remain stationary for too long, a tactical recovery team is deployed. You have not much time left to fix this. Harlon hesitated. He looked down at Caleb's shoes. They were covered in mud, but clearly expensive. Then the arrogance returned. Nice try. Harlon dragged Caleb toward the holding cells. He opened the heavy steel door of cell 4 and shoved the director of the FBI inside. Caleb stumbled, catching himself before he hit the concrete bench. The door slammed shut. The lock clicked. Not much time left, Harlon taunted through the bars. I'll be counting the seconds. He walked away, laughing. The lights in the hallway flickered. Caleb straightened his jacket. He brushed the dust off his lapel. He looked around the small, filthy cell. There was one other occupant, a scrawny young man with tattoos on his neck, sitting in the corner, staring at Caleb with wide eyes. What are you in for? The young man asked. Caleb sat down on the bench, crossing his legs with the elegance of a man sitting in the Oval Office. He looked at his watch. I'm here, Caleb said calmly, to clean house. The deadline came and went. The tactical team did not kick down the door. No helicopters descended on the Oak Haven police station. The storm outside had intensified, the thunder shaking the foundation of the old brick building. In cell 4, the young man named Tyler paced nervously, his sneakers squeaking on the damp concrete. You said they were coming, Tyler whispered, looking at the ceiling as if expecting a SWAT team to drop through the vents. You said you were the head of the FBI. Why are we still here? Caleb Voss sat perfectly still on the bench, his eyes closed. He was meditating, a technique he had learned during his time in counterintelligence. He was slowing his heart rate, conserving energy, and analyzing the variable he hadn't accounted for. The roof, Caleb said, opening his eyes. Corrugated steel, probably reinforced with iron mesh, plus the storm interference. We are effectively inside a Faraday cage. My tracker can't punch the signal through to the satellite. Tyler stared at him. So nobody knows you're here? Not yet, Caleb said calmly. But silence is its own signal. When I don't check in for the next briefing, the protocols shift from rescue to manhunt. They won't just look for a signal. They will look for everything. The days crawled by in a haze of misery. The station was cold, kept at a temperature designed to break the spirit. Lunch was a bologna sandwich on stale white bread. It was delivered by Officer Miller, the rookie. He looked tired. The arrogance from the roadside stop had faded, replaced by the nervous energy of a man who knew something wasn't right. Miller slid the tray through the slot. Here. Caleb stood up and walked to the bars. He didn't take the food. He looked Miller in the eye. Officer Miller, Caleb said softly. You have a family? Miller blinked, startled. That's none of your business. I see the ring. A simple gold band, not expensive. You're young, likely saving up for a house. Maybe a baby on the way. Miller shifted his weight. Quit talking! Officer Harlon is going to prison, Caleb stated as if reading a weather report. He falsified a police report. He assaulted a federal officer. He violated Title 18, Section 242 of the United States Code, deprivation of rights under color of law. That carries a 10-year sentence. Miller laughed nervously. You're crazy. You're just a drunk. I haven't had a drink since 2004, Caleb countered. Miller, listen to me. When the investigation starts, they will look at the logs. They will see you were there. If you stay silent, you'll go down with him. You'll lose the badge. You'll lose the pension. You'll lose the house you're saving for. Miller's hand trembled slightly on his belt. Google my name, Caleb whispered. Just do that one thing. Go to the bathroom, take out your phone, and search Caleb Voss, FBI. If I'm lying, I'm just a crazy old man in a cell. But if I'm telling the truth, you need to decide which side of the bars you want to be on, Miller. Miller! Harlan's voice boomed from the bullpen. Stop flirting with the prisoners! Miller jumped. He looked at Caleb one last time, fear swimming in his eyes, and hurried away. The days passed with agonizing slowness. Caleb didn't sleep. He spent the time memorizing details, the peeling paint on the ceiling, a violation, the lack of running water in the cell sink, another violation, the sounds of Harlon verbally abusing a woman brought in for shoplifting, evidence of a pattern. He was building a case file in his mind. By the morning of his arraignment, the storm had broken. Sunlight streamed through the high barred windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the stale air. The heavy steel door clanged open. Wakey, wakey sunshine, Harlon shouted, banging his baton against the bars. Court day. Time to see the judge. Hope you like maximum security, because with your attitude, you're not making bail. They cuffed Caleb's hands and feet. They chained him to Tyler and 3 other prisoners, men who looked defeated, broken by a system that treated them like cattle. As they led Caleb out to the transport van, he saw Miller standing by the dispatch desk. Miller looked pale. He was staring at Caleb with a mixture of horror and paralysis. He looked. He had Googled the name, and now he was terrified. Caleb caught Miller's eye and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Do the right thing, son. Harlon shoved Caleb into the back of the van. Move it, Director, he mocked. The doors slammed shut. The van lurched forward. They were heading to the Oak Haven County Courthouse. The courthouse was a grand white-pillared building that tried to look like justice, but felt like a plantation house. The holding pen in the basement was even worse than the police station. It was crowded, loud, and smelled of bleach and sweat. At the arraignment, a young woman in a rumpled gray suit hustled into the interview area. She carried a stack of files so high she could barely see over them, This was Elena Voss, the public defender. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. She called out names, handing out plea deals like flyers. Johnson, 2 years probation. Smith, time served plus fine. Voss. Caleb stepped forward. The chains rattled. Elena glanced at the file, then up at him. She paused. Caleb stood out. Even in a dirty, wrinkled suit, even in chains, he possessed a gravity that the other men lacked. "You're Caleb Voss?" she asked, adjusting her glasses. "I am." She flipped through the paperwork. "Okay, Mr. Voss, they threw the book at you. DUI, resisting, assault on an officer, impersonating a federal agent. The DA, Mr. Garrett, is pushing for a high bond. He says you're a flight risk because of the out-of-state license." She sighed, rubbing her temples. "Look, here's the reality. It's your word against Officer Harlon's. And in this town, Harlon wins. The impersonating charge is the sticky one. If you plead guilty to the DUI and resisting, I can get them to drop the felony impersonation. You do 30 days, pay a fine, go home." "No," Caleb said. Elena looked up, surprised. "Excuse me? I will not be pleading guilty to crimes I did not commit, and I will not require your services for a plea bargain. I require you for one specific task." "And what is that?" Elena asked, her patience thinning. "I need you to look at my file, specifically the copy of the driver's license they photocopied. Look at the address." Elena frowned, but flipped to the copy of the license. 2000 Pennsylvania Avenue, Washington, D.C. She paused. "Wait, that is the mailing address for the J. Edgar Hoover building," Caleb said. "Now, Miss Voss, please take out your smartphone. I can't use my phone in here. It's against protocol. Do it." Elena hesitated, then pulled out her phone, shielding it from the bailiff. She typed it in. Isaiah Sterling. No. Caleb Voss. She tapped the first link. Her eyes went wide. She looked at the phone. Then she looked at the man in chains standing before her. Then back at the phone. The official FBI biography page showed a man in a tuxedo, stern-faced, shaking hands with the president. The man standing in front of her was muddy and unshaven, but the eyes were identical. "Oh my God," she whispered, the blood draining from her face. "You really are." "Miss Voss," Caleb said, his voice low and urgent, "you are currently the only competent legal representation I have. I need you to go into that courtroom and demand an immediate dismissal. If the judge refuses, I want you to step back and let me speak." "They arrested the director of the FBI," she stammered. "Does anyone else know?" "Officer Miller knows, but he is too afraid to speak. Officer Harlon thinks it's a joke. Judge Reynolds is about to find out it is very real." Judge Reynolds hated federal interference. He was an old-school boy. He ran this court like a kingdom. "Then the king," Caleb said, "is about to be dethroned." "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. They were marched into the courtroom. It was packed. Monday morning arraignments were a spectator sport in Oak Haven. Judge Reynolds sat on the bench. He was a man in his 60s, with a face like a dried apple and a shock of white hair. He looked bored. "Case number 4922, the clerk announced. State versus Caleb Voss." Caleb was led to the podium. Elena Voss stood beside him. She was trembling visibly. District Attorney Garrett stood up. He was a slick man in a cheap suit, twirling a pen. "Your Honor, this is a serious one. Defendant was doing 55 in a 54. When stopped, he became belligerent, assaulted Officer Harlon, and then presented a fake badge claiming to be the director of the FBI. He paused for laughter from the gallery, but none came. "We are asking for bail to be set at $100,000 cash." Judge Reynolds peered over his spectacles at Caleb. "The director of the FBI, huh? That's a new one. Usually you boys claim to be sovereign citizens." The gallery chuckled. Harlon, sitting in the front row, smirked and crossed his arms. "Your Honor," Elena Voss squeaked. She cleared her throat. "Your Honor, I move for immediate dismissal of all charges." Reynolds frowned. "Dismissal? On what grounds, Miss Voss? Did the dog eat the evidence?" "On the grounds of mistaken identity and unlawful arrest," Elena said, gaining a little confidence. "And, Your Honor, I believe the defendant's claim regarding his employment is verified." "Verified?" Reynolds laughed. "Miss Voss, did you hit the bottle this morning? You think the head of the Federal Bureau of Investigation is driving a muscle car through Oak Haven, Georgia?" "May I speak, Your Honor?" Caleb asked. His voice filled the room, resonant and commanding. "You speak when spoken to, boy," Reynolds snapped. "I am not a boy, Judge Reynolds," Caleb said, straightening his spine. The chains clinked, but he wore them like jewelry. "I am the United States Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I was held incommunicado for days in violation of habeas corpus. My civil rights have been violated. My federal clearance has been ignored. And right now there is a very high probability that a federal task force is tearing apart your county looking for me." Reynolds's face turned beet red. He slammed his gavel. "One more word out of you, and I'll hold you in contempt. You think you can come into my town and threaten me? I don't care if you're the King of England. In this room, I am the law." "You are an administrator of the law," Caleb corrected. "You are not above it." "Contempt!" Reynolds screamed. 30 days. Add it to the pile. Mr. Garrett, I'm setting bail at $250,000. Take him away." Harlon stood up, grinning. He reached for his belt to grab the keys for the transport. "You're going to rot, Voss," Harlon whispered as he approached the defense table. Caleb looked at the clock on the wall. The storm had cleared hours ago. The GPS signal would have reconnected the moment he stepped out of the police van and walked into the courtyard. "Wait for it," Caleb thought. "Get moving," Harlon said, grabbing Caleb's arm. It wasn't thunder. It was the sound of the double mahogany doors at the back of the courtroom being blown off their hinges. The entire room jumped. Judge Reynolds dropped his gavel. Through the smoke and debris, a phalanx of figures emerged. They weren't local deputies. They were clad in full tactical gear, wearing windbreakers with bright yellow letters, FBI. In the center of the formation walked Special Agent in Charge Marcus Ross. He didn't look happy. Behind him were 6 men in suits, moving with the terrifying precision of a pack of wolves. The courtroom froze. The silence was absolute. Agent Ross walked down the center aisle, his boots thudding on the carpet. He ignored the bailiff. He ignored the prosecutor. He walked straight to the defense table. Officer Harlon, still holding Caleb's arm, looked at the agents, then at Caleb. His grip slackened. His face went the color of cottage cheese. Agent Ross stopped in front of Caleb. He looked at the handcuffs. He looked at the mud on the suit. Then slowly, terrifyingly, he turned his gaze to Harlon. "Get your hands," Ross said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "Off my director." The silence in the Oak Haven County courtroom was absolute, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning and the heavy, panicked breathing of Officer Dax Harlon. Special Agent in Charge. Marcus Ross stood nose to nose with the corrupt officer. Ross was a man carved from granite, a veteran of counter-terrorism units, and right now he looked ready to dismantle Harlon with his bare hands. "I said," Ross repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "Get your hands off him." Harlon snatched his hand away from Caleb's arm as if he had touched a hot stove. He stumbled back, bumping into the prosecution table. "I was just following procedure. I didn't know." "Search him," Ross barked to the team behind him. 2 tactical agents swarmed Harlon. They kicked his legs apart, slammed him against the table, and stripped him of his service weapon, his taser, and his cuffs. "Hey!" Judge Reynolds shouted, finally finding his voice. He stood up, his face a mask of purple indignation. "What is the meaning of this? You can't just barge into my courtroom with guns drawn. I'll have you all held in contempt. Bailiff, arrest these men." The bailiff, an overweight man near retirement, looked at the 12 FBI agents armed with MP5s and tactical armor. He slowly raised his hands in the air and stepped back against the wall. "I ain't doing nothing, Judge." Caleb Voss stood up. He held out his wrists toward Agent Ross. "Keys," Ross demanded, looking at the bailiff. The bailiff scrambled to toss the keys to Ross. Ross unlocked the handcuffs with a gentle click. Caleb rubbed his wrists. The red marks were deep, cutting into the dark skin. Caleb looked at his hands, then turned to the gallery. He looked at the court reporter, the stunned citizens, and finally the trembling Elena Voss. "Miss Voss," Caleb said, his voice calm but projecting to the back of the room, "thank you for your advocacy. You may step down. I will be representing myself from this point forward." He walked toward the bench. He didn't ask for permission. He moved with the predatory grace of a man who owned the very ground he walked on. "Judge Reynolds," Caleb said, "under the authority vested in me by the United States Department of Justice and pursuant to the Federal Supremacy Clause, I am declaring this courthouse a federal crime scene." "You can't do that," Reynolds sputtered. "This is a state court. You have no jurisdiction." When a local municipality uses its judicial system to kidnap a federal official, extort money, and falsify evidence, it ceases to be a state matter and becomes a federal conspiracy, Caleb replied coldly. "Agent Ross." "Sir," Ross snapped to attention. "Secure the exits. No one leaves. Seize the court stenographer's records. Seize the judge's laptop. And arrest District Attorney Garrett for conspiracy to commit fraud and deprivation of rights." "What?" Garrett squeaked. He dropped his pen. "Now wait a minute. I just prosecute what the cops bring me. I didn't do anything." "We'll see what your emails say, Mr. Garrett," Caleb said. 2 agents grabbed the DA and cuffed him. He began to weep, loud, ugly sobs that echoed in the high-ceilinged room. Then Caleb turned his attention to Officer Harlon, who was currently pinned to the floor by an agent's knee. Caleb walked over and crouched down, ignoring the pain in his stiff joints. He looked Harlon in the eye. The bully was gone. In his place was a terrified child. "You told me I had not much time left," Caleb whispered. "I apologize for being late. Traffic was murder." "Please," Harlon gasped. "I have a family. I made a mistake." "You didn't make a mistake, 492, Caleb said, using the badge number. "You made a lifestyle, and today the bill comes due." Caleb stood up and brushed the dust from his knees. "Get him out of my sight. Take him to the federal holding facility in Atlanta. Do not process him here. I don't want his friends losing the paperwork." "Yes, sir." As they dragged Harlon out, he screamed, "Miller! Miller! Tell them! Tell them we were just doing our job!" Caleb looked around the room. He spotted Officer Miller standing by the side exit, looking like he was about to vomit. "Officer Miller," Caleb called out. The room went deadly silent. Miller froze. "Come here," Caleb commanded. Miller walked forward, his legs shaking. He stopped in front of the director. "Give me your badge and your gun," Caleb said. Miller unclipped his holster and unpinned his badge. He handed them over with trembling hands. Am I going to jail, sir?" Caleb looked at the young man. He saw the terror, but he also remembered the sandwich. He remembered the hesitation. "That depends," Caleb said, "on how much you want to talk." The Oak Haven police station had been transformed. Gone was the sleepy, corrupt atmosphere of the previous days. The station was now a hive of federal activity. The FBI Mobile Command Unit was parked out front. Agents in windbreakers were carrying boxes of files out of the archives. The glitchy computer system was currently being dissected by 3 cyber forensic specialists from Quantico. Caleb Voss sat in the chief's office. Chief Emmett Whitaker, a fat man who had been fishing when the raid happened, was currently handcuffed to a chair in the hallway, watching his empire crumble. Caleb had showered in the locker room and changed into a fresh suit brought by his team. He sat behind the chief's mahogany desk, drinking a cup of high-quality tea that Agent Ross had miraculously procured. "Status report," Caleb said. Agent Ross stood before the desk. "Sir, we've cracked the server. It's worse than we thought. They have a quota system for civil asset forfeiture. They target out-of-state plates, specifically luxury cars. They book the drivers on DUI, impound the cars, and then auction them off to a shell company owned by the judge's brother-in-law. They split the profits." Caleb nodded. "Classic racketeering. RICO statutes will apply. How many victims?" "Going back several years, hundreds. Most just pay the plea deal and leave because they can't afford to fight it. You were the first one to say no." "And the drugs?" "We found a stash in Harlon's locker. Cocaine, marijuana, meth, all pre-bagged for planting on suspects. We matched the batch numbers to evidence from dozens of other cases." "Good," Caleb said. "Bring me Harlon." They didn't bring Harlon to an interrogation room. They brought him to the chief's office. Harlon was in an orange jumpsuit now. The irony was palpable. He shuffled in, shackles on his ankles. He looked small, deflated. Caleb gestured for the agents to leave them alone. "Sit," Caleb said. Harlon sat. He wouldn't look Caleb in the eye. "Look at me," Caleb commanded. Harlon looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. "Do you know why I'm the director?" Caleb asked softly. Harlon shook his head. "Because I hate bullies," Caleb said. "I grew up in a neighborhood where cops like you terrorized my father. I watched men like you take a hard-working man's dignity just because you could. I swore that if I ever got the power, I would use it to crush that kind of rot." Caleb slid a file across the desk. "This is your life, Dax. Every text message you sent, every GPS log from your cruiser. We know about the skimming. We know about the fake overtime. We know about the girl you assaulted years ago who was too scared to file a report." Harlon began to cry. "I can cut a deal. I can give you the chief. I can give you the judge." Caleb leaned back, steepling his fingers. "We already have the chief. We already have the judge." Miller sang like a bird. "He gave us everything. Dates, times, locations. Miller is going to walk away with probation and a new career in security because he showed a shred of humanity. You don't have anything to trade." Harlon's face crumpled. "Please, Director, I was just—" "You were just what?" Caleb's voice hardened. "Just having fun. You laughed, Dax. That's what sticks with me. You laughed while you ruined lives. You laughed while you took a father away from his children. You laughed while you stole money meant for groceries." Caleb stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the town of Oak Haven. "There is no deal," Caleb said, his back to the prisoner. You are going to be indicted on dozens of counts of federal corruption, kidnapping, and civil rights violations. You will go to a maximum security federal prison. And you know what happens to dirty cops in federal prison, Dax." Harlon was sobbing openly now, his head in his hands. "They don't have a very good time," Caleb whispered. "Get him out of here." Agents entered and dragged the weeping man away. Caleb watched him go. He felt no joy, only the heavy, grim satisfaction of a job done. "Sir," Agent Ross poked his head in, "we have one more thing, the impound lot." "My car?" Caleb asked. "Yes, sir, but you should see this." Caleb followed Ross out to the back lot. The rain had started again, a light drizzle cleaning the grime off the city. There, in the center of the impound lot, was the 1967 Shelby GT500. But it wasn't alone. Surrounding it were dozens of other cars, a Porsche with Florida plates, a vintage Mercedes with New York tags, a family RV from Ohio, all stolen by the department, all waiting to be sold. And standing next to the Shelby was a young woman. She was crying, holding a set of keys. "Who is that?" Caleb asked. "That's Elena Rodriguez," Ross said. "They took her car days before they took yours. She's a nurse. She was moving to Miami for a new job. Everything she owns is in that trunk. They told her it was evidence and she'd never see it again." Caleb walked over to her. She looked up, frightened by the suits and the guns. "Miss Rodriguez?" Caleb asked gently. She nodded. "I am Director Voss with the FBI. Is this your vehicle?" "Yes," she sniffled. "Are you going to take it away?" Caleb smiled. It was the first time he had smiled in days. "No, ma'am," he said. "I'm here to give it back and to tell you that the men who took it will never bother anyone again." He turned to Ross. "Process every car in this lot. Find the owners. Return them. If there are fees, the FBI pays them and bills the county. If there are damages, we sue the sheriff's estate." "Yes, sir." Caleb walked over to his Shelby. He ran a hand along the muddy fender. It was dirty, but it was still beautiful. He opened the door and slid into the driver's seat. It smelled like leather and rain. He put the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, a deep, throaty growl that shook the puddles on the ground. Ross leaned into the window. "You heading back to D.C., sir? We have a convoy ready." Caleb shook his head. "No convoy, Marcus. I think I'll finish the drive myself. I have a lot to think about." "Sir, with all due respect, is that safe?" Caleb looked at the badge sitting on the passenger seat. Then he looked at the ruins of the Oak Haven Police Department. "I think," Caleb said, "that the roads are a little safer today than they were yesterday." He shifted into gear, the tires spinning slightly on the wet pavement, and drove out of the gate, leaving the wreckage of the corrupt empire in his rearview mirror. The storm that had battered Oak Haven, Georgia, was nothing compared to the digital hurricane that made landfall days later. It didn't begin with a press conference or a grand announcement. It began with a single click. A junior analyst at the FBI's cyber division, acting on a direct internal directive from Director Voss, decrypted the dashcam file from cruiser 492. He scrubbed the metadata, redacted the faces of bystanders, and uploaded the raw file to the Bureau's public transparency portal. From there, the internet took over. By the next morning, the video had migrated from government servers to X, Reddit, and YouTube. It trended globally within hours. The footage was grainy, washed out by the rain and the glare of the headlights, but the audio was crystal clear. The world heard the wet thud of Caleb Voss's face hitting the hood. They heard the sickening click of the handcuffs, but mostly they heard the laugh, that wet, arrogant, dismissive laugh of Officer Dax Harlon. Untouchable? FBI Director Arrested in Georgia Corruption Sting. The headline didn't just crawl across the bottom of CNN and Fox News screens, it dominated the cycle. The sheer absurdity of the situation, a small-town bully accidentally mugging the top law enforcement officer in the country, struck a nerve. It was a story of hubris that felt almost biblical. In Washington, D.C., inside the brutalist fortress of the J. Edgar Hoover Building, Caleb Voss sat in his office. His desk, usually covered in intelligence briefings on foreign terror cells, was now stacked with letters from Oak Haven, not from officials, but from citizens, people who had lost their savings, their cars, and their dignity to the same racket that had tried to break him. Agent Ross stood by the window, watching the press swarm the gates below. "The governor of Georgia is on line 1, Ross said, checking his tablet. "He's apologizing again. And the Senate Judiciary Committee just moved your hearing up. They're calling it the Oak Haven incident." Caleb turned his chair around, looking at the white dome of the Capitol building in the distance. His face was stoic, but his eyes burned with a cold, focused fire. "Let the governor wait," Caleb said, his voice low. "And tell the committee I'll be there. I have a few things I need to say on the record." While the media circus raged, the reality on the ground in Oak Haven was a surgical dismantling. The Department of Justice didn't just prosecute the corrupt precinct, they hollowed it out. Federal agents in windbreakers swarmed the courthouse like white blood cells attacking an infection. They carried out boxes upon boxes of files, years of fraudulent traffic stops, coerced plea deals, and lost evidence. Judge Reynolds, the man who had screamed that he was the law, sat in the silence of his sister's basement counties over. He was wearing an electronic ankle monitor that blinked a steady, mocking green. His assets, the sprawling lake house purchased with civil asset forfeiture funds, the fishing boat, the offshore accounts in the Caymans, had all been frozen. The king of Oak Haven had been dethroned, stripped of his robe, and left to watch his empire crumble on the evening news. But the hardest, coldest karma was reserved for the man who started it all. USP Coleman II is a high-security federal penitentiary in Florida. It is a place of concrete, steel, and noise, a constant grinding cacophony of shouting men and slamming gates. Inmate 89-42019 sat on the edge of his bunk in the protective custody wing. The other inmates knew who he was. In prison, there is a rigid hierarchy. Cop killers are treated like royalty. Dirty cops are treated like prey. Dax Harlon looked years older than the man who had stood in the rain that night. The muscle he had built in the gym to intimidate teenagers was fading, replaced by the gaunt, hollow look of a man living in perpetual cortisol shock. A guard, a federal officer who looked at Harlon with open disgust, slid a letter through the slot in the steel door. Harlon picked it up. His hands shook. It was from his wife. He opened it, hoping for a lifeline, hoping for news about the appeal. "Brett," the letter began, "the bank took the house. The lawyers took the savings. I can't do this anymore. I'm taking the kids to my mother's in Ohio. I don't want them to have your last name. Please don't write to us." Harlon stared at the paper until the words blurred. He crumpled the letter in his fist. He closed his eyes and tried to remember the power he used to feel. He tried to remember the rush of adrenaline when he pulled someone over, but all he could hear was Caleb Voss's voice echoing in the cramped cell. "You have not much time left." He had laughed then. He wasn't laughing now. Harlon curled up on the thin mattress facing the wall as the long, dark night of his sentence stretched out before him. Months later, the Senate hearing room was packed to capacity. The air was thick with the scent of floor wax and old money. Shutters clicked furiously as Caleb Voss took his seat at the witness table. "Director Voss," Senator Collins began, leaning into his microphone. Collins was an old-school politician, the kind who disliked federal interference in state matters. "What happened to you was a travesty. No one disputes that. But some of my colleagues are concerned about the scale of your response. You effectively deployed a paramilitary force to a local courthouse. You seized a town's entire judicial infrastructure. Was that truly necessary for a traffic ticket?" Caleb adjusted the microphone. He looked at the senator. Then he looked directly into the camera lens. He was speaking to the millions of Americans watching at home, the teachers, the truck drivers, the nurses. "Senator," Caleb said, his voice resonant and steady, "when those officers stopped me, they didn't check my record. They didn't ask for my story. They saw a black man in a car they wanted, and they saw a target. They saw revenue, and they laughed." The room went deadly silent. "I didn't deploy that task force for myself," Caleb continued, his voice rising with controlled passion. "I could have made a phone call. I could have had them fired and been back in D.C. for dinner. But I sat in that cell for days thinking about the people who can't make that call. I thought about Elena Rodriguez, a nurse whose car was stolen by badge number 492. I thought about the young man in the cell next to me, Tyler, who was arrested for walking home from a late shift." Caleb leaned forward. "I deployed that force to send a message, Senator. The message is that the badge is a shield to protect the innocent, not a sword to rob them. And if you stain that shield, if you use the color of law to conduct a criminal enterprise, there is no shadow deep enough to hide you. We will find you, we will expose you, and we will stop you." The clip of that speech didn't just go viral. It became a movement. Months later, Congress passed the Voss Transparency Act. It was the most sweeping police reform bill in decades. It mandated federal oversight for all local civil asset forfeiture, required body cams to be live-streamed to secure tamper-proof servers, and created a dedicated FBI division specifically to investigate small-town corruption. On a warm evening in late spring, the noise of Washington felt a world away. Caleb Voss drove the 1967 Shelby GT500 down to the banks of the Potomac River. The car was pristine. The mud was gone. The paint gleamed under the streetlights, and the engine purred with a deep, throaty rhythm. He parked it by the water's edge and got out, leaning against the hood, watching the moonlight dance on the dark water. A few minutes later, a modest Honda Civic pulled up alongside him. A woman stepped out, still wearing her scrubs from a long shift at the hospital. It was Elena Rodriguez. "Director Voss?" she asked, hesitating. Caleb smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. "Miss Rodriguez, please call me Caleb. I'm glad you could make it. I'm in town visiting my mom," she said, looking at the Shelby. She ran a hand over the fender, a look of disbelief on her face. "You know, when they took my car, I thought my life was over. It sounds stupid. It's just a machine. But it was my freedom. I couldn't get to work. I couldn't pay rent. I felt so small, like I didn't exist." "I know the feeling," Caleb said softly. "Powerlessness is a heavy weight." Elena looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes. "You showed up. You didn't just get the car back, Caleb. You gave me my life back. You gave a lot of people their lives back." Caleb looked out at the river. He thought about the long road that had led him here, from the streets of Detroit to the director's chair, and finally to that muddy roadside in Georgia. "That's the job, Elena," he said. "Sometimes you have to walk through the mud to find the gold, but you never let the mud stain you." She hugged him then. It wasn't a formal handshake. It was a hug of shared trauma and shared victory. "Thank you," she whispered. "Drive safe, Elena," he said. He watched her get into her car and drive away, her taillights fading into the city. Caleb turned back to the Shelby. He opened the door and slid into the leather seat. It smelled of rain and gasoline, the smell of the road. He checked the rearview mirror. There were no flashing lights, no shadows, just the open road and the future. He turned the key. The engine roared to life, a sound of freedom, a sound of power, and most of all, a sound of justice served. Caleb Voss put the car in gear and drove into the night, a guardian watching over the dark. Caleb Voss's story isn't just a drama. It's a warning shot across the bow of corruption. It reminds us that authority without accountability is nothing more than tyranny in a costume. Officer Harlon and Judge Reynolds learned the hard way that you never truly know who you're messing with, and that arrogance is often the precursor to a devastating fall. But the real victory wasn't the arrest. It wasn't even the prison sentences. The real victory was the reform. It was the reminder that justice, while sometimes slow, is always watching. Caleb proved that one man armed with the truth and an iron will can dismantle a system that everyone else thought was untouchable. We hope you enjoyed this saga of karma, resilience, and ultimate redemption. If you believe that justice should be blind and that no one, no matter their badge or their gavel, is above the law, hit that like button right now. It helps us share these important stories with the world. And here is a question for you. What would you have done if you were Caleb? Would you have revealed your identity the second they pulled you over? Or would you have waited, endured the cell, and sprung the trap just to expose the corruption? Let us know in the comments below. Type trap if you would have waited, or badge if you would have shown your ID immediately. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story where the underdog bites back.